We don't just push the victims to forgive. What?
From Interfaith Alliance, this is State of Belief Radio. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Rauschenbusch, broadcasting this week from New York City. In our chronically short attention span age, it's more important than it's ever been to connect with themes and thoughts that take some time and effort to take in and process. And no matter how much technology advances, good old books are still the best way to do that. This week, I wanted to take a look at some exceptional religion-themed books that have appeared in this past year. We're not doing some kind of ranking, but highlighting some of the writing that was noteworthy to me and the team here at Interfaith Alliance.
Whoa. Wait, we ask things of the perpetrator? Wait, the person who did harm has to do stuff?
A super important theme in this age of conflict and division is right there in the title of Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg's latest book, On Repentance and Repair, Making Amends in an Unapologetic World. And it speaks volumes that it comes from a Jewish faith leader in an age of growing anti-Semitism.
We've seen a lot of conversation in certain Christian spaces around losing America, quote and unquote, that America is turning on Christianity. And I can't quite see it that way as a Muslim.
Another timely release was Harun Mogul's 2 Billion Caliphs, A Vision of a Muslim Future. Harun has been on State of Belief a number of times and brings an unflinching honesty to both his observations and his suggestions that is very present in his latest book.
It might mean that you are more at risk for harm for yourself, but that's something that you should be willing to do if you truly believe in justice for everyone.
And then there's the book that got me thinking about doing this episode in the first place, The Light We Give, How Sikh Wisdom Can Transform Your Life, from Simranjit Singh. It breaks new ground in religious literature, and like all of the books we'll be talking about on today's show, it's a great gift for this holiday season. You can hear State of Belief on the radio and get the podcast on Apple Podcasts and all the other podcast platforms. Every week, I will be in conversation with some of the most fascinating and impactful civic and religious leaders across the nation. You won't want to miss it. Please subscribe today. State of Belief Radio is made possible in great part by the generous support of our listeners. If you've made a donation, I really want to thank you. And if you haven't pitched in yet, information on how you can help keep this show on the air is available at stateofbelief.com. And you can find out more about the work of Interfaith Alliance and join us at interfaithalliance.org. And now to my first guest. Award-winning author Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg is scholar in residence at the National Council of Jewish Women. She's published 7 books so far, and the latest, On Repentance and Repair, Making Amends in an Unapologetic World, came out earlier this year. It leans on Jewish wisdom and encompassing universal values. It's a powerful, super timely, and ultimately practical call to action. Danya, welcome to State of Belief Radio.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I do want to start by saying I have followed you very closely on social media. And I just think you are someone who should be lifted up. They're going to lift you up in future. They're going to go back and say, who were religious leaders that made a difference on social media? And I think you are par excellence, someone who has used that platform. Specifically, I follow you on Twitter to help make plain some things that are difficult and to really, do things in a graceful way, a clear way, and coming out of your tradition, like deeply in your tradition. So I applaud you for that because it's not an easy feat. It's something I look at really closely. And I thank you for that. And, before we get into your book, which actually, as I learned in your book, had an origin story of Twitter, I'm curious how you're feeling, and I'm sorry to spring this on you, how you're feeling about Twitter right now. As someone who thinks deeply, lay some Jewish wisdom on us on what to do about Twitter.
Oh, gosh. I don't know. Let's see if I have any Torah.
Come on.
State of Twitter. I feel like I'm standing in the palace watching the colonnades fall around us. It is true that Twitter has always been corporate owned. It's always had significant problems in terms of far right influences and disinformation and trolls and not banning Nazis and all of that. And it has been the critical space in the public square for enabling marginalized voices to be heard, for the birth of movements, Arab Spring, Black Lives Matter, Me Too. I mean, we really have to give Twitter the credit that it is due. And it's very sad to watch it falling apart piece by piece, and to watch darker forces creep in.
Yeah.
I think the Torah is just to, as King Solomon said, King Solomon asked for a ring, as the legend goes, that would make him happy when he's sad and sad when he's happy. And so he got a ring, and on the ring it was written, Gamze Ya'avor, right? This too will pass. And so I think we just need to be present in what's happening, to stay put. I personally am staying put for the moment. I still have this secret hope that the government or the public library or somebody's going to swoop in and save it. And if this is the end of this, I have faith that something new will emerge to be the space for people to communicate across communities, to organize and build movements. I believe that something will come. I do not know what it is, and it's scary because we don't know what that is yet.
I'm going to be looking for your wisdom on that, as I look for your wisdom on many things. I want to get into your amazing book. It's on repentance and repair, making amends in an unapologetic world. And as part of that, I want to understand a little bit more about you. For people who don't know you, you're a rabbi. Where do you come out of? Like, what's your background, and how did you get to this point where you felt like you had to write this book?
Well, those are two, my background in terms of my own upbringing. I was I was raised in kind of a typical American Jewish household, of the kind of suburban, semi-affiliated type. We went to synagogue a couple times a year. We had Passover Seders. We weren't particularly observant at home. And my own relationship to Judaism was, long and winding and weird, and that story didn't really start until I was in my 20s. That is a whole long story. I wrote a book about that.
What was the name of that book, in case people want?
Surprised by God. It's a story of how a grumpy punk rock little atheist wound up discovering, somewhat out of grief in the glitter of late 90s San Francisco, spiritual practice that changed her life.
Amazing. Wow. I want to spend some time with that book. First of all, punk rock rabbi is like what I need in my life. And so I'm very there. That does give me a flavor of like how you're coming at the work that you do. And then why this book now?
So the book really started out of Me Too 5 years ago, as we as a country and a culture began asking a new set of questions. There were all of these famous men that had been named as sexual abusers and issued these weak sauce statements, yes, I did it, but the real problem is that my family is sad now, or what are my fans going to think? And, nobody's really mentioning the victims and the impact and the harm that they cause, right? It's like, oh no, this is so sad for me personally. And this question of like, now what, right? They've issued these statements. They're saying they're going to go away. Maybe they're fired. I don't know. Like, now what? What do we do? And particularly if it's not people are pressing charges, getting into the legal department. And a friend of mine who's a journalist asked me some questions that I responded. And then I sort of threw my response also on Twitter, taking the Jewish framework for repentance, which for us is not about feeling bad. It's about a set of actions that one does to take responsibility for one's harm and to center the victim's needs, attend to the victim's needs, and clean up your mess, but also do the work of growing and changing so you don't do the thing again. And I was like, well, here's what we would look for if these dudes were really taking seriously what they did and cleaning up the work. Like, this is my guess about what we would see in terms of how it would leak out in terms of the public and the impact, because they didn't just harm these specific victims. It's like their fans and like, what does this mean about rape culture? And there are all of these eyes on these people. And the response was shocking. People were like, whoa, wait, we ask things of the perpetrator? Wait, the person who did harm has to do stuff? We don't just push the victims to forgive? What? And I started to, in these dialogues with people on Twitter, I started to realize that our culture just has this hole in this space that we don't know what to ask of perpetrators. We say we want justice. We don't always know what that means, and it often sounds like revenge. And we put all this emotional labor on victims without knowing how to care for them. And Judaism has a whole system.
Yeah. Well, so talk a little bit about that. Like, can you? I mean, I love it when someone like from the 500s or something like that comes in. You know what we need now? We need someone who was living 1,500 years ago who actually was thinking about this and actually might have some wisdom to offer. I mean, talk about like where you went to find this, to find some of the Jewish wisdom that you ended up offering.
I love me a dead guy.
Wow. Okay. If there's one quote from this, if there's one quote we're going to like lift out, Rabbi says she loves a dead guy. Okay, good. We got that much. All right.
My time running around reading books like dead guys. But I discovered feminism and philosophy both in high school, and so reading dead guys and live women kind of my library.
Wow, nice.
So Maimonides, the 12th century philosopher.
My fault. Sorry. I was in the wrong century.
He's quoting 5th century people, so it's legit.
Okay.
But Maimonides is 12th century. He's a philosopher. He's a Torah scholar. He's a physician. He's one of the greats of my tradition. And what he did is he took basically all of the wisdom that was all over the place in different places around our tradition up until then. And he reorganized it, and he made some personal choices about, what positions we're going to take. And, there's a lot of chutzpah involved in his rearranging, but, what pieces of what things. But he rearranged things in a way that it would be easier for people who are not scholars to understand what to do and how to do it. And people who are really scholars can continue to read the winding debates of the Talmud, and the regular folk just need something more straightforward. And in that rearranging, this book called the Mishneh Torah included what we call the laws of repentance, Hilchot Tshuva. And when I read the laws of repentance, I see 5 distinct steps for how you do the work of owning the harm that you have caused, attending to it, and doing the work of transformation.
Can you give out just? I want people to read the book, so we are going to, on repentance and repair is the book, but we're a taste, just like what are the 5 steps, if you don't mind articulating those, and then how some of maybe we can talk a little bit of like an example of where you've seen that done well, so that people might be, not so afraid of actually entering. Because I think there's a lot of fear about entering into this conversation even.
Mm-hmm. There's so much fear. So understandably, but
yeah. I mean, it's, but let's start with the 5 steps.
Okay. So Number one, is confession. You have to own what you did out loud, fully. No hedging, no trying to make yourself look better than really is merited, right? Know what I meant, really, I'm a good person, right? We don't care. Like, own what you did, name it, which you'll note requires all this pre-work of having to cross this bridge from the story of like, I'm always like the good guy, I never do anything bad, right? You have to kind of acknowledge that, listen, if you're not an irreparably bad person if you caused harm this one time, right? We are all people and we do stuff. And sometimes the stuff we do is great and sometimes it's not so great. And when we do the not so great things, we need to clean up. And so you have to face the part where today was not, like you messed up, and name it and own it. And ideally, like, it's praiseworthy, Maimonides says, to do it publicly, because that is asking for accountability, right? From everybody. You're saying, guys, I need some help here, right? I'm struggling. Like in some way, I was not able to be my best self. And I need your help and support to become the kind of person that I want to be. Right? I'm on my journey with anti-racism. I'm struggling with my sobriety. Right? I don't want to be this angry all the time anymore, whatever it is. Right. So that's owning it. Yes. And it's critical for the victim, because this can be the end to the gaslighting. Right? It can validate their experience, right? This really happened and it was not their fault, right? They didn't invite whatever. They didn't lead anybody, right? It's clear, and it's clear to everybody. So that's step one, owning it. Step two, begin to change. Because if you finish this process and then you go around and go do the same thing again, like we haven't succeeded. Right. You make future victims like, no.
Which again, if you say, change takes work. Like that's, so that's again, like all of this is actually very, it's about actions. The action of confession, the action of work to change, all of it is like, but I think that, I think that once is what I'm hearing is a roadmap, which sometimes is what people lack. And so you change, and then what can that lead to?
So, well, first, like change can be a bunch of different things. Like, do you need therapy? Do you need to hook up with a spiritual director? Do you need to call your sponsor? Do you need to learn more about anti-racism or trans liberation? Do you need to ditch the friends that make you behave badly? If we're talking about an institution that's caused harm, does HR need to revise their policies so that they don't bury complaints anymore? Do they need to fire their board, right? What needs to happen so that can't happen again? Then we get to amends. Right. Then what does the victim need? What kind of care and redress would feel like? We can't undo what happened, but it will feel like at least it can sew up that hole in the cosmos that has been created. Right. It's remuneration. It is reparations. Right. And I'm using that word intentionally.
No, I'm hearing it.
And you can't make amends at a person, because then if you decide for them what the reparations are, then you're still treating them as an object instead of an autonomous subject that gets to decide for themselves. You have to ask, what do you need? And the answer might be different than what you would have assumed. And that's a learning too. Right. And then after amends, after you have done the work of actually fixing in some way, then the apology, right? Action first, second.
That's super interesting. Yeah, isn't that interesting? Like, when they say actions speak louder than words, I mean, I think that's like super important. And I'm just like blown away that we're still with Maimonides, right? I mean, this is like, this is someone like 12th century dead guy who is like has recognized that this was something going on then. Like this is not unique to our generation. This is actually something that is a human situation, and people from that long ago and longer have had to approach this. So, I mean, I think that's amazing. So we're at step 4 with apology.
Right. And this is, and presumably it's because if you did the apology right at the confession step, you're still the harm doer, basically. Like nothing's changed. And so then it's checking a box. Whereas if you've been already, all of these things and all of this learning has happened, you're a different person and you get it in a different way. And so that apology is coming from this place of remorse and a deeper space of being actually able to see the person that you hurt. And it's coming from a more open heart. And then after apology, then, step 5 is pretty organic. Like if you've done all of this work and you've done it correctly, then pretty easily you get to the last place, which is when the opportunity to do the thing again comes up, and it always does. You don't do it. You make a different choice.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is so helpful. And I just, you kind of imagine this is interpersonal. This is, this can happen at a familial level. It can happen certainly in religious institutions. I mean, if you want to drive yourself crazy, listen to pastors talk about how they, women should stay with their abusing husbands and forgive them. I mean, it really like, I can't even, I didn't have the language that you've just given me to talk about it, but this is like, when you're making that kind of shortcut that it's just non-existent. But then it can also be society. I mean, when we think about what we're wrestling with the legacy of slavery in this country and how fearful people are, white people, I'll say, about like the conversation about reparations, reparations did happen, by the way, after the end of slavery. But it was the white people who got money because their slaves were no, this is real. This is real.
I know.
This is like, the slavers got money, and it was called reparations. Is that nuts or nuts? So so I mean, not nuts because it's not should not be surprising. But we have used the term reparations terribly before. But in our country, if we think about this ain't really like relevant, but also, deep Jewish wisdom from the 12th century, we could actually begin down that path. But people are so scared about it that it's, it's terrifying. But also it can be in, as you say, it could be institutions. It could be anywhere. I mean, it's all of us, by the way. Like, I like the way you said that. It's just like, this is not like those people should really be looking at this. None of us are perfect. And so I do think like the roadmap idea is like the next time we're in a situation where we're seeing this, I just think like, I want to, again, on repentance and repair, making amends in an unapologetic world. Talk to me about unapologetic. Like that is a really interesting kind of, boom. Like, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to you when we say an unapologetic world?
I know unapologetic is usually used in this, like, kind of often in this, like, kind of corporate white feminism, girl power kind of way, like, but it's actually not good to not apologize. And the defensiveness that people have.
Right.
Not actually reckon with the harm that they have caused. It's a problem.
Yeah.
And as you're saying, like, listen, we all are harm doers. We all have been harmed. We're all bystanders to harm, right? This is all of us.
Yeah, yeah, but there are specific things that we should be, as a nation, I will say, that are not equal, and that will continue to plague us until we, you know, and I know you know this much better than I do, but, like, you know, until we address the, you know, the kind of extraordinary misogyny and racism in this country, it's just not, you know, we're not going to become the nation that we, I think, envision for ourselves.
Right. And I really truly believe that these 5 stages of repentance could truly bring us to a more equal, equitable, and just and whole future for our country. And I mean, it's fascinating. The 1619 Project was an extraordinary invitation, right? Is extraordinary truth telling, right? Is sort of laid bare all of the ways that the legacy of slavery and the way that white supremacy is shot through in pretty much every aspect of American life, right? It's in housing, it's in the medical, every aspect of the medical world. It's in our traffic patterns, right? Or the way our traffic patterns work is shot through with white supremacy, right? Music, everything. And when it was published, that's not the confession step, because the confession has to come from the harm doer.
Right.
In this case, I would say on the level of national harm, we're talking about the U.S. government, right? We're not talking about every individual white person.
Right. No. Yeah.
And folks listening, there's a difference between responsibility and guilt. It's okay to be white. I'm white, right? That we just, you don't have to feel bad, but you do have to see that there's a problem and decide to be part of a solution, right?
Don't get me going down the CRT like ridiculous.
Oh, what happened, right? But that's the thing. She basically said, here's some truth, guys. Can we open up the story and do some confession, start to the confession and start to change stuff? And America said no. In fact, we are going to pass 36 states have passed laws saying we are not going to teach accurate history, or we're not going to teach about anti-racism or whatever. Right?
Yeah. I mean, so the entire process has basically been stopped.
Right.
There, you know, so
right.
You know,
can I say one more thing about this?
Yeah, please.
One more thing that I think is really important as we talk about reparations and talk about grappling with the legacy of slavery and the, you know, hundreds of years of systemic racism, is that it's very tempting to want to say, like, oh, the United States should offer reparations to Black Americans and then everything will be fixed. And this is where I think this guideline can help remind us that that's not so simple. Right. First, own the harm. Then number 2, start to change, like make sure the harm can't happen again. So that means looking at all of the ways that white supremacy and systemic racism drive our country and working on changing that. If we, you know, pass out some money that one time and say, great, we're done, we fixed it, and then all of our systems are still irredeemably racist, we haven't actually done the work.
Right. No, thank you. I mean, we're close to time, but I do want to just, you know, I want to address what has to be troubling for all Jewish Americans. It's troubling for me is this the rise of anti-Semitism and the permission being given. I wonder how you're thinking about that in terms of your own safety and your community. And as someone who actually has a big picture of American like society, like how are you talking about the way we should be talking about anti-Semitism in this particular moment?
For the last 1,000 years, how anti-Semitism has functioned is that during times of instability or crisis, the people in power have said, blame the Jews, not us. And so then there's the pogrom, and then there's the expulsion, and then there's the whatever. And so the peasants, instead of being mad at whoever's actually in power, they go after the Jews, right? look at Christian history in Europe. That's basically what happened. That's how we got the Holocaust. That's it. That's the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and the Tsar trying to start things up in the 1905 revolution. And that's what's happening now, right? Blame the Jews, not us. That is why anti-Semitism undergirds Christian nationalism. To say, nothing of the fact that, all the streams of Christianity that are mad that the Jews never converted. But we have to just name that and keep naming that and naming the ways that anti-Semitism functions as this shadow. It's like it works as the shadowy, the cabal, the deep state, the people behind the scenes, the people pulling the strings. Like those tropes are meant to be, it's supposed to be hard to name and hard to grasp. And so, of course, we're seeing it now. And of course, we're seeing it with the rise of Christian nationalism. And many Jews in America are white. And so we have white privilege. Not all Jews are white. And so we have to be able to hold both our the fact that we benefit from white privilege and the fact that we are targeted by white nationalism. Like those are both true. Yep. And our bottom line is we have to be in solidarity with everybody else. White supremacy is the enemy, and it's solidarity or bust.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that this is helping us see how this is part of a broader moment that we're in, and not like some sort of separate thing, but also something really that is, is really affecting, individuals, families, really fearful on the kind of rhetoric. And I have to say, the craziness of the former president talking about how Jews better get it together because, I've been the best on Israel. And, everything he's doing right now is just textbook division, and this terrible trope about dual. I can't even go there. It was just we're in a moment where it's the strings are so tangled that if you don't watch out, it's just going to tangle us all, and we're going to find ourselves, completely in a mess.
Yeah. What Trump did was actually textbook white nationalism, right? Yeah. The Jews, white America is white people's country. Jews don't belong here. Jews belong in Israel. And by the way, he's also playing to the evangelicals who want the Jews all to go to Israel so that the war of Gog and Magog can happen. And nobody cares about Palestinians in this scenario, of course.
Right. No. Yeah.
But that the Jews and Palestinians basically blow each other up, and then the rapture happens. And so it's not actually caring about the sanctity of Jewish life. And it's also completely ignoring the fact that, I'm sorry, I'm an American. This is my country. I am not Israeli.
You're right.
And this is my country. You're right. But it's the dual loyalty, but it's basically it's white nationalism. And white nationalism and Christian nationalism have become friends.
All right, Rabbi, I am asking all of our guests today to list 3 books that they love, in addition to their own, to share with our listeners. Who would you like for our listeners to know about?
So one of the books that just blew me out of the water this year was called Becoming Kin, an Indigenous Call to Unforgetting the Past and Reimagining the Future by Patty Krawick. And she's a Native writer. She's in Canada, so First Nations. And it's visionary. It both teaches people how to decolonize their thinking and then invites them in, right? It's about becoming kin, invites them into the world in which Native thinking and Native visions are centered, but that includes and expands for everybody, right? And offers a profound vision of what can be.
I love that. Love that.
Yeah. And there's a book of poems by a friend of mine, actually, Hila Ratzabi. It's called There Are Still Woods. And it is, I mean, she's brilliant. And it is a haunting book of, it's a love song to nature, but it's a haunting kind of elegy in the face of global disaster, right? In the face of the burning of our planet, and this moment of poignancy, both understanding where we are and sort of just naming where we are in a really profound way.
Say the title and the author again.
So it's called There Are Still Woods, and it's Hila Ratzabi.
Great. And one more?
Yeah. One more is probably going to be named by other people, but I can't not. Rest is Resistance, a manifesto. Tricia Hersey is the NAP bishop, and her work talking about rest as reparations is so important. And, there's a lot of Jewish thinking about Shabbat as anti-capitalist and the first labor laws and all of that. But her reading of the importance of rest specifically for Black people whose labor has been exploited for hundreds of years is so important.
Amazing. Thank you so much for those 3 books. Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg, a scholar in residence at the National Council of Jewish Women. Her latest book is titled On Repentance and Repair, Making Amends in an Unapologetic World. Danya, I really appreciate having you with us today on State of Belief Radio. It's been a pleasure.
Well, it's so fun to talk to you. Thank you so much.
We're just getting started with this week's show. Up next, Haroon Moghal, author of 2 Billion Caliphs, A Vision for a Muslim Future. And later, the author of The Light We Give, How Sikh Wisdom Can Transform Your Life, Simranjeet Singh. You're listening to State of Belief Radio, brought to you by Interfaith Alliance. It's been over 12 years since the first time Haroon Moghal was on this program. And he's been back many times since then, increasingly as a successful author. Earlier this year, Haroon released his latest book entitled 2 Billion Caliphs, A Vision of a Muslim Future, and it's among our favorites for 2022. Haroon, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I can't believe it's been 12 years.
You get a special medal that you have to wear every time you talk to the show. But we're thrilled. And also, congratulations on this book. Tell me why you felt like this was the book that you wanted to write right now.
So I had written a book called How to Be a Muslim, which was actually the story of how most of my life up till then I had tried and failed to be a certain kind of Muslim. So it was a little bit tongue-in-cheek. But not everybody got the joke, and many folks came to talks and picked up the book thinking it would be just that, a guide to being Muslim, which I thought was quite audacious for a book that's not that long. And it got me thinking that maybe I should actually write a book about what it means to be a Muslim. And so the initial idea was quite simple. It was just supposed to be a little introduction to Islam. And as I started writing, it transformed itself completely from who are Muslims in the past and maybe the present into who can Muslims be and who should Muslims be. So from a book that looked to what had come before to a book that was looking into what was coming ahead and how to prepare for it.
Amazing. And so the title is 2 Billion Caliphs. Can you explain to us what a caliph is, which not everybody might understand that reference?
So probably most people have heard the term, if they've heard the term in reference to either historical caliphates, kind of like empires, dynasties, monarchies, that sort of thing. The Ottoman Empire was the probably the most formidable of those and probably the most well-known. And then in much more unfortunate circumstances, the ISIS iteration, which popped up before COVID, and was quite brutal, but fortunately short-lived, although it did a tremendous amount of damage in the regions where it operated. And so the term, I think, was in currency in Muslim spaces as well as in public conversations. And I wanted to investigate the term. And the more I looked into the Islamic sources, specifically the Quran, actually the original iteration of caliphate, the first use of the term, is as a word that describes Adam and Eve, and then in theory and in ambition, all of humanity, that every single person, or at least Muslims in this version, are caliphs, as in we are stewards or custodians of God's creation, that we have a special authority and a special responsibility and a certain kind of unique moral agency. And I wanted to dwell on that and stop focusing so much on hierarchical models of Muslimness that constantly try to slot us into certain positions vis-a-vis one another, with a few at the top and everyone else at the bottom just going along, into something that was more democratic, more organic, more local, and more resilient. And certainly I thought that was something we needed for the years and decades ahead.
Oh, that's so interesting. I mean, I come from the Baptist tradition, which right now there's like Baptists who call themselves bishops and all this kind of stuff. But the real like foundation of it is like really like radical priesthood of all believers, and the soul freedom, and the sense that every single person is able to have that full dignity of a full, a full Christian, and that there's actually no one else that has that over them. And I think the idea that this is totally new to me, by the way, and thank you for writing this already, this idea of the caliph is something that, every Muslim can embody, is just, I think, a very powerful idea, especially as we look around the country. I'm thinking about Iran immediately, but this idea of like, who gets to say for another person what a Muslim is. And, not to single out Islam, that happens in every tradition. You're not a Christian, you're not a Jew, but I think, right now we see that in so many places around the country, like certain people, the gatekeepers of what counts as Muslim. I really appreciate that you're putting in that work. Like, so what did you uncover or, discover? I like to say that for me, like, writing is revelation. Like, often, when I have to preach or I have to do something and I start writing, I'm like, oh, I didn't even know I thought that. I'm wondering if you had that experience. Like, what did you uncover or what was revealed when you started writing this book about, specifically about what counts as being a Muslim?
Well, so when I started writing the book, it was before COVID. And so we lived in a very different world, and certainly a very different world than what has transpired in the last year. And there's two events in specific I want to focus on. The first is a little bit more than a year ago, the fall of Kabul and the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan. And then not so many months later, the Russian invasion, or I guess second invasion, depending on how you look at it, of Ukraine in February. So coming up on almost a year now. And I think those two events together, if you take them as bookends, they really mark the end of the post 9/11 era. That in the United States, pretty much across the board, Islam is no longer the bogeyman. There is certainly Islamophobia and there is bias against Muslims, but we are not in the public consciousness as the biggest problem. Some people will make that China, some people will make that Russia, some folks will make that the other political party, but certainly we're kind of lower down on the scale now. And what that meant to me was really, for the first time, Muslim communities, certainly in the West, but perhaps more broadly, for the first time in 2 decades, we are free from a certain kind of weaponized binary that some Muslims advanced and some folks in the West advanced, that you're either on this side or that side. And so I asked myself, who are we going to be now? Who should we be? Who can we be? And that's where I went to the idea of caliphate, literally to get to what you're saying, this idea of the sort of that the priesthood of all believers kind of thing is not so dissimilar, is this idea that everyone is judged by God as an individual, and something I was always vexed by growing up. I came from a pretty religious family. America, and I think maybe Canada, are the most ethnically diverse Muslim nationalities in the world, which is kind of fascinating and kind of amazing. And you get these Muslims from all different backgrounds kind of thrown together by geography, economy, what have you, and suddenly they have to find a place to pray. And one family, I'd say, is coming from Senegal, one family is coming from Indiana, one family is coming from Pakistan, and they're all equally convinced that what they're doing is authentically Islam. And at least outwardly, no one can judge and look into someone's heart, but outwardly, everyone is committed to this tradition, yet has very different ideas of what that means. And so that was one take on it. But the other was that people didn't want to yield their take because of this idea of universal individual accountability, that actually Islam is, contrary to how many people present it, including in Muslim spaces. You mentioned Iran, and Iran is a perfect case in point. It is a very individualistic religion in the sense that every human being, male, female, rich, poor, black, white, what have you, has to stand before God for judgment. And you can't really pass the buck. Of course, obviously, people have different levels of capacity in the world and different things to answer for. Certainly, if you have more power, you have more responsibility. But at the end of the day, we have choices and we have freedom, or we should have choice and we should have freedom. So that's really where this came from, this idea of, okay, now we can imagine a different kind of future. We have to imagine a different kind of future. And what is the role of faith in that future?
I think that is incredibly powerful. When you look, obviously the Quran is revelation. Like, are there areas in the Quran that you found as you were writing, like, I don't think that has quite been lifted up the way I'm seeing it right now. I mean, I'm curious if there's anything from the Holy Scripture, or I may be calling it wrong, but I think you all understand what I mean, is that sprang to life for you as you were writing this book that maybe you hadn't paid as much attention to before?
Well, certainly one thing did jump out, is that many of the descriptions of the divine in the Islamic tradition tend to focus on otherness. And so, and this is common in the Abrahamic tradition. There are elements of this in Judaism and Christianity, certainly, of the divine as so different from us as to be somewhat incomprehensible, certainly different in terms of limitless, omniscient, omnipotent, not bound by time and space, perfectly coherent with itself, himself, however you want to frame it. And that, the way I saw this translated in Muslim spaces, created a sense of distance. And one thing that occurred to me as I was reading this is that certainly there is something to be said for that kind of distance, and we can mine that for days, weeks, months, what have you. But there is also a kind of interesting impact or a consequence of the distance, which is intimacy. Is that a divine that is completely independent of creation is the kind of divine that creation can always turn to. That unlike anything and everything else in existence, no matter how much we want to do for, let's say, a spouse, a loved one, a child, a parent, a coworker, a friend, we can't always be there for them. It's simply impossible. And as we learned in COVID, no matter how wealthy or sophisticated our societies have become, we can be felled and slowed and stopped by things that are literally invisible to the naked eye. And so there is this sense that everything in the world is contingent, but the divine, being necessary and self-sufficient, is a kind of a rope to hold on to, a hand to hold on to. And so maybe one of the reasons for the distance is to enable intimacy. And it sounds counterintuitive, that how can you be connected to something that is so radically different from us that we can't even really get our heads around it. But maybe that's the point, or at least part of the point.
No, I actually, I think the way you're describing it is really striking. It occurs to me, like, if you were sinking, you wouldn't want to send you wouldn't want a rope that you were sending to yourself.
Yeah.
You'd want a rope that was sent by something completely different than you, that you could hold on to and pull yourself out. You know what I mean? So I think that this idea of radical, intimacy and radically different is actually really powerful. It makes me think that, like, I'm sure that this book, your audience probably was the Muslim community, but my guess is that, for many of us reading this book, it can be, we can have a better insight into a community, but also learn spiritual wisdom for ourselves.
Certainly. And I took a lot out of my engagement with other faith traditions. So learning how Jewish scholars or Christian scholars or Buddhist scholars approach their tradition, I think opens up space for us intellectually, creatively, with compassion, to see things from different perspectives and maybe understand ideas in different ways. And I think that's something that all people of faith have to do, especially now, where I think the challenges that are ahead of us, they're not insurmountable, but they're pretty big. Things like climate change, certainly a lot of the instability we see in our politics, and even just the jumbling of humanity that we now live in. I've just been watching the World Cup, for example, and it is kind of remarkable that here we have arrived as a species at a point where we are literally bringing together many countries of the world. And that's not to say that everything's done right or everything's above board, but that's a level of interconnectedness and immediacy that a few generations ago we could have never imagined. And that's certainly a beautiful thing, but it's a challenging thing because it forces us up into each other's faces in a way that we never had to be before. And what are the moral, the spiritual, the human resources that allow us to survive that and not be manipulated through that to outcomes that are actually bad for us individually, never mind each other, as communities and countries.
Yeah, I mean, it actually, like the proximity, it presents to us an immediate sort of like, okay, we can make this good or bad. And it really is it's like almost that simple. Like we can learn about one another and celebrate one another. We can we can make that an opportunity for a closer engagement and a mutual enrichment, or we can just decide to hate one another. And it almost is that simple. And the United States is like a really good example of that, and like that in motion. I'm curious, when you think about a vision of a Muslim future, let's take that really to our own country, and like what will look good to you as a Muslim and for the Muslim community and for America as a whole in 25 years if we could somehow do this right. And I love, what I love about what I'm hearing you is there is a kind of a positive frame. And yet it's going to take work. But what would it look like? Like, what will a positive future look like? And then walk us through what we need to do to get there.
Sure. So, it's funny because this connects to a question I know you're going to ask me later, but there's a saying by, I believe it was Dwight Eisenhower, that every American has to have a religion, but I don't care which one it is. I'm sure I'm garbling that up. But effectively what he was saying is that America as a democracy only functions if there are civil religions. And I think there's something to that. So after 9/11, there was a lot of conversation about whether Islam and the West were compatible. And I think these were often very superficial or zero-sum conversations. And where I stand now is I think that for the United States, we as a country, and actually the Islamic tradition, have certain similarities. And these are similarities that exist in a lot of traditions. So I don't mean by any means to say that this is simply exclusive to Islam as a faith tradition. It's just the faith tradition that I know well. But in the Islamic tradition, there is this idea of individual agency, which certainly you find in Christianity and Judaism and Sikhism and other faith traditions. And what that means is that ultimately what Muslims are doing on a day-to-day basis is applying their moral reasoning and their circumstances and contexts and emotions and needs to sacred text. And we as Americans, obviously America is a political idea, it's not a religion, but we do something similar. That's what it means to be in a democracy. And we have to learn how to respect each other's rights to do that. Now, one thing I think as a Muslim makes this a little easier for us is that I've never really had a problem accepting that mainstream culture doesn't go my way. So, for example, we've seen a lot of conversation in certain Christian spaces around losing America, quote and unquote, that America is turning on Christianity. And I can't quite see it that way as a Muslim, principally because I've never imagined, just for demographic reasons, that America would really be a society that would follow my cultural or religious norms. So, as a very trite, silly example, it never bothered me when someone said Merry Christmas, because I just assumed that I live in a country where most people are Christian or culturally Christian. And so that's just what it is. And so, I didn't get off Friday afternoon, but as long as I had a reasonable accommodation, I kind of didn't mind. And I think we're reaching a point as a country of pluralism where we're going to have to learn how to accept each other's rights, especially in the really awkward places where they bump up against each other. And I think part of that requires a shift. So in a lot of Muslim spaces, we have a lot of talk of responsibility, not a lot of talk of rights. So in Iran, for example, there's not a lot of talk about human rights from the governmental level, right? Certainly there's a lot of talk about responsibility, as in what the state will enforce and expect you to do. And I think in the US, we've gone too far in the other direction, that we have a lot of talk about rights, but we don't have a lot of talk about responsibility. And so if we look at the conversation around COVID, I'm not really sure how we became as a country I don't remember anyone really up in arms over seatbelts, for example, right? No one, I don't really recall that anyone saw that as an unjust imposition on our freedom. It was just sort of a reasonable
Oh,
thing
I think
to do.
some people did, but it's a good example. I think I actually think people thought that was like, oh, the communists are coming to get us by
So
making us
maybe
wear
we have communism in our
yeah,
cars.
yeah,
I
yeah,
guess,
yeah. So, but it's a perfect example. Like,
and yeah, and so and that's the thing is I think that's that kind of and that's a good point. So maybe these are the kind of things that fade over time and we get used to them and we
right.
move on.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, yeah, your point is good, and so I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
Keep
no,
going.
not at all. And so I guess what I'm trying to say in terms of a future is I'd like to see a future where Muslims, along with other people of strong ethical traditions, whether religious, spiritual, moral, philosophical, what have you, contribute to creating the civil, organic, apolitical fabric out of which a rich democratic society is created. It can't be top down. It has to be bottom up and side to side, that kind of thing, because that's what really takes. I think that's what democracies require to function well. And if you don't have that, you have either absolute chaos, so you have civil conflict, or you have dictatorship. And I think both are fundamentally hostile to the human spirit, never mind human flourishing.
Yeah, I love that. Oh my God, that's so great. Before I let you go, I want you to offer 3 books that you think, in addition to your own 2 Billion Caliphs, A Vision for a Muslim Future, what are 3 books that struck you this year? We've been talking about bumping up against ideas. What are 3 books that have struck you?
Sure. So one book that I loved was Arthur Brooks's From Strength to Strength. So I'm 42, and this is a book about the second half of life. I don't know if you've read it. I found it really interesting and enjoyable because here's, an obviously very smart man thinking about the second half of life, literally, and what does it mean to prosper and flourish, and what has he learned along the way. And so there's a lot of wisdom there about how we change, or rather should change, and age gracefully and intelligently. And I think really the core idea is that he says that, up until your 30s and maybe your early 40s, maybe you're very good at assimilating new information. So you're more open to change. You can learn new skills. And starting in our 40s, we develop a different talent, which is to synthesize information. And so he's really saying that you should learn as much as you can. And then that's where wisdom comes from, is that as we get older, through experience, we learn how to combine even novel information. And, he had this great anecdote that he once was at a workshop held by, I think it was Meta or some big company, the former Facebook, and they were lauding their diversity. And he kind of raised his hand and said, "There's no one here over 28." And he said, maybe you'll have a little bit of a different perspective on the world if you've lived through more of the world. And it was a really good
so
point.
interesting.
I think as we get older, we realize that we look at, for example, social media and say, hey, some of that stuff should have been pretty obvious. That maybe a human being shouldn't have that much information all at once, right? That kind of thing. So
well, as a 58-year-old, I will say that you just get so wise at my age. Anyway, I just oozing wisdom, as you can tell. All right, that sounds amazing. That was Arthur
Arabic
Brooks.
Term, sheikh, like a sheikh.
What
the Arabic term sheikh? Literally,
oh, yes.
I mean, it's usually meant to mean someone who's wise, a learned elder, but literally means someone who has white hair. And so my question is, what happens to someone who has no hair? Is that an elevated status that I've achieved?
Yeah. But from now on, please do call me Sheikh Paul, because I do have white hair now.
That's a good one.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Okay, Arthur, say the name one more time.
Arthur Brooks, the author, and the book is called From Strength to Strength.
From Strength to Strength.
It's an easy read. It's a short book. It's a great book.
Yeah.
The second one is also a short one. It's called Wild Problems by Russ Roberts, who was at the University of Chicago and I believe now is president of a university in Jerusalem. I don't know him personally. I've never met him. I came across his book randomly in the library, and the librarian said, "Hey, this is a great book. It's a very slim book, and it's just a little book on why we have so much trouble making big decisions." And I would strongly recommend it to anyone who is confronting a major life choice, such as major career choice, marriage, divorce, what have you. It's a really novel take on why big decisions elude us. And it's a really thought-provoking read. So I really liked it. I'd recommend it.
That's amazing. Say the name one more time.
So it's called Wild Problems, as in, untamed, wild. And the author's name is Russ Roberts.
Russ Roberts. I think what I don't want to hide the fact that you actually went to a library and asked a librarian or listened to I mean, thank God for libraries. Thank God for librarians is all I'll say. That's beautiful.
It's great to have people who, and they read and they know books, and it's wonderful.
Amazing. Yes. Good. Okay, what's your last one?
Okay, the third one is a little bit of a fun one. So I don't know how to pronounce the author's name. Her first name is Erica. Her last name is Fatland, Fatland. I appreciate the irony because most people often struggle with my name, but she's Norwegian. So the book is it's called Borderland. It's a big fat book, and it's originally in Norwegian. I of course read the English translation, so I can't comment on the original, but it's quite entertaining and funny. And weirdly prescient because she, being from Norway, was very curious about one of Norway's neighbors, Russia. And I guess one day opened an atlas and realized that Russia borders, I believe, 14 countries. And so she decided to basically travel the border of Russia. And of course, this was before the Ukraine war, when now I think that's probably not possible, or perhaps a very good idea. But it's a really charming, fun, funny book. Just about a woman who's really observant, really witty, really clever, really smart, really curious, traveling through societies that some of them she knows about, some of them she doesn't know about. And she has a knack, like great travel writers, for finding the really weird stuff that somehow
it
it's
sounds
really strange.
Amazing.
It's a good read.
Borderland.
I think it came out 3 or 4 years ago. I could be wrong, but it's a fun one.
This is supposed to be 2022.
I mean, I'm perpetually behind. I will.
All right. Well, we're gonna let it go. But yes. Okay. Haroon Mughal is an author, public speaker, and occasional Friday preacher who works to build a vibrant role for faith in shaping a better future. Haroon's latest book is titled 2 Billion Caliphs, A Vision for a Muslim Future. Haroon, thank you for being with us today on State of Belief Radio.
Thank you for having me, Sheikh Paul.
It is always exciting to find shared values and teachings across diverse faith traditions. And while the tenets of the Sikh religion may not be known to many non-Sikhs, there's a lot in the book. The Light We Give, How Sikh Wisdom Can Transform Your Life, that's utterly relatable and that is inspiring and illuminating. And part of that is because of the person who wrote the book, my good friend Simranjeet Singh, who I am delighted to welcome to this show. Simran, welcome.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks. Good to be with you.
Well, so first of all, for those for whom the Sikh religion is not something that they are familiar with, can you just give us the the kind of Reader's Digest version of so that people can come into the room with us with some background of where you're coming from and what the religion is all about?
Yeah, sure. One of the interesting things about the Sikh religion is while most Americans have not heard of it or don't know much about it, it is the world's 5th largest religion with about 30 million people worldwide. It's also one of the younger major religions. It was started about 500 years ago in the Punjab region of South Asia. And the core philosophy really relies on 3 elements, I would say. The first is a deep belief in oneness, the connectedness of all humanity. And that, comes out in various ways theologically in terms of how we see equality, non-discrimination, how we see the importance of caring for the people around us and the environment, because everything we see is divine. The second element is what I would describe in English as love. And it's a very simple connection here. And that is when you truly feel connected to the world and the people around you, then that's a feeling of love. And we know that through our relationships and the promise of Sikh wisdom is that those momentary experiences of goodness that we have through love is something that we can have in all moments of our life if we learn how to appreciate the connectedness that we all have. And then the third aspect of Sikh philosophy that I find really compelling is a corollary to these two. If you feel connected and love for the world around you, then your natural impulse is to show up in service. And so service, what we call seva in our tradition, is a really powerful practice, both in terms of it being an expression of gratitude and devotion, serving the people around you, and also as a spiritual practice, for the self, as a way of reducing the ego. So those three pieces of Sikh philosophy, I think create a really nice vision for what I want the world to look like, and what it looks like to find happiness in a society that can also often feel difficult.
I think, we've already gotten a taste perhaps of the light we give, how Sikh wisdom can transform your life. But I'd like to talk a little bit about your own background, because you're a Texan boy, and, and it's not necessarily like the first thing people think about. Oh yeah, Sikh is, obviously San Antonio, big Spurs fan, so, but tell me a little bit about, your background, where you come from. And, I think part of what I love about your book is that it's very much connected with you. And it's not like specific to you or unique to you, but it is rooted in an experience, in a life. So maybe you can tell a little bit about like your own, where you come from as you write this book.
Yeah, I appreciate, when I first started writing the book, I just wanted to share about this worldview and this philosophy that I love, and that has given so much to me. So there was never any intention that I had about sharing from my own life. And as I started writing and sharing with my editor and my agent, they both started saying, well, where's the story here, right? Like we need a vehicle for understanding. Like nobody cares. Nobody cares about philosophy. We care about people. And so bring yourself into the story a little bit, and tell us just what it's like to be a Sikh in this country. And, to some degree that felt strange, because we all have our lives. They all feel normal to us. And as I started talking to people, I started to understand that maybe my experience as a turban wearing Sikh growing up in Texas is unfamiliar to a lot of people, and some of the challenges that I faced can help people see the world a little bit differently. And so that's the why behind sharing a bit of my story as part of the book. And for me as a kid growing up in Texas, we were the only ones in South Texas in the whole region who wore turbans. And my brothers and me, in many ways, our lives were very typical, very much into sports, got along great with our friends and our neighbors and our classmates. A lot of close friendships, and a really overall a lovely childhood. But interspersed with that was daily challenges with racism and people's ignorance. And that shaped a lot of my experiences in this country, and what my life has looked like today too. And perhaps the most formative moment for me that really changed the trajectory of my life came after 9/11. And Paul, you and I have talked about this before. And this is not a unique story for people in my community and for other communities that were affected by the racist backlash after 9/11. But as I started walking around San Antonio, and as people started to treat me differently, and to perceive me differently, before I was in many ways just different. And now all of a sudden I was the enemy. And it's not that I had changed. It's that people's perceptions of me changed. I really had to figure out a few things about my life, right? Why was I choosing to look this way? And is it something I wanted to continue? That was a big question for me. Another one is, what do you do when your understanding of yourself is different from how other people perceive you? And to what extent do you take that seriously? To what extent do you ignore it? In what ways might it be dangerous or risky to not take it seriously? But I think, these are all questions that we all face in various ways. And the last one, I think, really that hit home for me was recognizing the challenges that religious minorities in this country face, racial minorities in this country face. I was experiencing both at the same time, and really wanted to figure out how I could serve these communities in ways that they could have equal access to opportunity and justice in this country as we've always promised. And so that experience
Yeah.
of my life growing up really shaped who I've become.
Yeah. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had Muhammad Ali, who was from Impact, who was talking to us about the bill in the House, Resolution 662, which was to recognize the violence that happened to Muslims and people perceived as Muslims after 9/11. And as has been clearly demonstrated, the Sikh community was mistaken for Muslims and experienced violence and hate in terrible measures. And so I think that, that resolution is still present in the House. And I encourage listeners to consider how we might show up for people who were experiencing that after 9/11. I appreciate you bringing that into them. I also think it's really important to recognize that religion never happens without people. And so the stories of people is really important as we think about and really how it shapes us, how it manifests in different ways in different people. And so your experience is not the only Sikh experience, but it is it's an entry point for many people who haven't had an opportunity to meet folks. What is one tenet that in those moments when you have felt most challenged, is there a piece of the scripture or some sort of tenet that really has helped you in really moments where you were like, how am I going to get through this?
Yeah, there are a bunch that I turn to, and they've increased over the years as the challenges have grown and I've grown older. But one that comes to mind immediately, and I was thinking about this the other day in a tough moment. I was walking down the street after an event in New York City, and a guy came after me, not chasing me, but he sort of stepped up to me, and he started yelling at me, saying, "Get out of here with your effing turban." In those moments, I've had these moments all my life. You don't really know what the right response is. I think in part because there is no perfect response, and getting comfortable with the reality that these situations, because of how we've set them up as a society, it's always going to be imperfect, and you're always going to walk away feeling like that was a situation I would have rather not had. But what I think about in these moments is this this concept that comes up early in our tradition, in our scripture, called nidbo. It comes as two words, nidbo and nidvad. And nidbo means without fear, and nidvad means without hate. And they're essentially descriptions of the divine. But as descriptions of the divine, they're also qualities that we aspire towards. And there's this one line that came to my mind in this moment, and it comes up often for me in situations like this, where it's really unclear how to respond. And the line from scripture is, and it's essentially saying the truly wise person is one who doesn't give in to fear, and who doesn't inspire fear in others. And it's a tough tightrope to walk sometimes. In a moment like this, I could feel afraid of this person, and I that's the natural impulse. So how do I live into fearlessness in this moment where this person may very well attack me? I mean, he's very angry at me for whatever reason. And also, how do I respond in a way that's not hateful or angry or fear inspiring, but is compassionate to this person? And so that's something that's been really important for me personally in moments like this.
I can imagine. I mean, the title you gave to the book is "The Light We Give." Where does that come from? What inspired that title?
Well,
I mean, you just kind of articulated a little bit of some of the background of how to give light, but I'm just curious if there's another reference point for that.
Yeah, light is such a common reference in religious traditions, whether we're talking about enlightenment as an achievement, if we're talking about illumination in context of darkness. I think it's such a beautiful metaphor. And part of what Sikh philosophy teaches us is that everyone has the same divine light within us. And part of what I wanted to do I'm a dad. I love dad jokes. I love puns and double entendres. And
You're
so,
like infamous for dad jokes, actually. So we may ask you to gently harm us with one later. But yeah, go ahead.
well, I love the entendre of the light we give being something you give off light, and also it's something that we can choose to share with others. But in this sort of the framing of the title, in both cases, there's something implicit about we just do this, whether you choose to accept it or not. The light is inside of you.
Oh, I
And
love
part
that.
of the Sikh philosophy, the teaching is the difference between those who are able to find joy in life and those who continue to suffer because of the various difficulties we face is the ability and the practice of learning to see the light that's always all around us. And so that's something that's been such a powerful teaching for me. I love that concept, and so I was trying to bring that into the title a little bit.
Beautiful. You mentioned children, and we had our friend Rabbi Stanton on last week, and we've had I'm also a dad. What does it mean to you to try to imagine passing this tradition on to your children?
It's an interesting question, because in some ways I think it's very similar to how my parents thought about it as immigrants. For them, growing up in a country where, and at least a region of North India where there were many Sikhs, and then moving to a place where there weren't any, they had to be very differently intentional about how to raise kids and preserve the tradition. I find the same thing to be true here in New York City, where we are surrounded by incredible diversity, but we have to make a lot of effort. What my kids are learning in school is wonderful and great, but they're not learning about their heritage, and that's on us at home. We make extraordinary effort. I mean, we go out to Jersey, of all places, every weekend for their Punjabi school, so that they're learning their language and their culture. We teach traditional Sikh music to them at home. We speak Punjabi with them when we can. And so it's very much how so many other people transmit whatever part of their cultural heritage is important. And I think the one thing that feels a little bit different is while I want to instill the values of the tradition that I think are so important for well-being, and while I want my kids to love the tradition that I love and want to share that with them, I also find myself feeling okay. I mean, they're still young, so there's no resistance yet, but I'm also starting to feel okay in a way that I didn't know if I would, if they come to me one day and say, this isn't for me. And to me, the real concern for me is, are they engaging with themselves and the world in a healthy way that protects their mental health and their spiritual well-being. Like I would love that feels really important to me, even more so I think than the actual religious identity.
Yeah, I actually that mirrors very much my approach. I would love for my kids to understand why I love Jesus and why I follow, and why why I go to church and why my husband go to church. But I'm actually fine with them having their own adventure and recognizing that my own path was very winding, and also when you say maybe this isn't for me, it also can be right now. There's lots of ways that we can circle around, but if again, it's kind of like if you show the light, then it's fine. Whatever, as long as they have light in their life.
Yeah.
I really do. But I really appreciate that. It's just the reality. You can't force kids. Right,
right,
eventually.
Exactly.
But it's also recognizing for them why we do is actually the most important thing. So that they have a good example. I think is really great. One thing I wanted to just touch base with you that just kind of happened. Do you know the board member at Interfaith Alliance, Simran Stuhl-Panagel? Do you know this fellow?
I know of him, but I'm not sure if we've met.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he's really fine. And one of the things that has happened, just last night, the Senate passed the Respect for Marriage Act, which was really remarkable. And what has been kind of this amazing cascade of Sikh organizations signing on to say, actually, we want to support Respect for Marriage Act, not necessarily because like all of us are support same sex, or marriage equality or however you want to call it, but because we recognize that people are different in this country, and we want to show up for that, and I thought, so there were like a dozen Sikh organizations that signed on to this letter, saying, and it actually made a difference. And so I just think it was a pretty remarkable moment, I think, for a tradition that I'm sure it's very divided within the community, but the younger generation is probably saying, is this really like, we're going to do this? I don't know. I'm curious what your reaction is to that.
Yeah, I love to hear that. I saw the letter circulating amongst Sikh organizations and leaders. I wasn't sure, honestly, how people would react. In many ways, the Sikh community is agnostic on issues like this. We don't have, I think one of the beautiful things about our tradition is we don't have the kind of hierarchy in other religions, and that's very intentional. Your faith is meant to be interpreted for yourself, and we don't need to make arbitrary rules for other people in terms of how they should live their lives. And so I love that about our faith. But one of the challenges then becomes when there are clear cultural, social issues, are we willing to step in and lead with our values? And for me, something like same-sex marriage is very much in line with our belief that everyone should have equal rights. I mean, I find it to be difficult theologically to argue against it, but at the same time, given the immense homophobia and anti-gay bias within South Asian culture, it takes a lot of courage to step forward and take a stand. And so up until recently, I haven't seen many Sikhs, at least not in an organizational sense, taking a position on issues like this. And it seems to be a trend that's been shifting over the past decade or so, thanks in a large part to queer communities who are opening up these conversations and pushing the agenda. But I love to hear the fact that these organizations are actually now, knowing that there is risk involved, willing to step forward and do what they need to try in terms of their values.
Yeah, I mean, it's just extraordinary and understanding like how deep that is. I want to just take a moment to recall something that you did after the terrible attack on Oak Creek. We just recognized the 10th anniversary of the shooting at Oak Creek, the Gurdwara. I think there was a white supremacist who went in and killed. I think it was 10 or maybe more, or maybe, I don't know. I can't remember exactly the number, but a terrible amount, and then traumatized a whole generation of people in that Gurdwara that day. And one of the things that you really have been forthright about, especially as someone who's mistaken for a Muslim, is not to say, "Oh, I'm not Muslim. You don't hate me. I'm not Muslim." Which would be a really easy way to kind of approach that moment. And instead to say, like, actually, that's not the right response at all. And so I don't know. I'd love for you to you also have made, for a while you were a professor and teaching Islam, which is, I think, quite unusual for a Sikh to teach Islam. So I just think that, what you do is you continue to use your spiritual and religious background to cross bridges that are hard to cross, frankly, and to take stands that sometimes not everybody's going to go there with you, but you take them nonetheless and lead.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think any of this is all that remarkable, at least in terms of our tradition. We have many examples of our leaders showing us what it looks like to step up for other people in their time of need. And it might mean that you are more at risk for harm for yourself, but that's something that you should be willing to do if you truly believe in justice for everyone. And the term we use for that in our tradition is sarbat dafala, which means the upliftment of all humanity. And of course, I care about my community. Of course, I would love for Sikhs to have more safety and security in this country and all over the world. But our worldview is, just because I am of one particular religious, I'm not better than anyone who is not Sikh. I don't deserve more than anybody who is of a different religion or a different race. And so really trying to live into that. And, it was one of the funny things that would come up when I was teaching. I was teaching Islamic studies in Texas in 2016, I think I started. And people would come up to me all the time and be like, well, you look like a Muslim and you're holding a Quran, but you're saying you're something else. And we've never heard of this other thing, but like you're just confusing people.
Are you trying to trick us?
And now I have a different challenge, which is I teach Buddhist history at Union Seminary. Oh, wow. And for me, I mean, my main role maybe speaks to this in a way that might make sense for people. But right now I serve as the executive director for the Religion and Society program at the Aspen Institute. And our focus is to ensure that everyone, regardless of what they believe or how they pray, or even if they don't believe and if they don't pray, making sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to thrive, to find happiness in our society. And while that has been our goal for a long time, the unfortunate reality is we haven't reached it. And so for me, it really is my life's mission to help at least get us closer to that goal. I don't think we're close enough yet that it feels achievable, within the next year or within the next decade, but hopefully we can continue going in the right direction rather than going the other way around.
Yeah. Well, I know that you, I know that they are lucky to have you steering that ship, and do know that the Interfaith Alliance is looking forward to partnering with you in all ways that make sense, and looking forward to that in the future. So
same.
We are celebrating your book, of course, The Light You Give, but also we wanted you to have a chance to give some light on some books in 2022 that you loved. So what are some books that you want to make sure our listeners hear about?
Yeah, sure. One of my favorite books that I just read is by one of my favorite poets. He has a new collection of essays called Inciting Joy by Ross Gay. I had the privilege of sitting with him at the Texas Book Festival and doing a panel together, and just really, really enjoyed seeing his thoughts that in many ways mirrored some of what I believe in terms of finding happiness in our daily lives. Can
you say the name of the author one more time?
His name is Ross Gay, and the book is called Inciting Joy. There's a book that is on a different wavelength by someone named Mary Frances O'Connor. It's called The Grieving Brain, The Surprising Science of How We Learn from Love and Loss. But I love it because it's a topic that I don't think about too often for many reasons. But as we all go through difficulties in our life, trying to understand what our brains are going through the process, I found to be really insightful and compelling. So that was a really nice book as well.
That's really say the name one more time.
The book is called The Grieving Brain: The Surprising Science of How We Learn from Love and Loss.
By
Mary Frances O'Connor.
I only ask you to do this twice because I know that when I'm listening to the radio and someone says something, I miss it always the first time. So we really, these are great suggestions. What else are you going to lay on us?
Okay, the last one is a book that I read last year, but if you haven't read it yet, I would highly recommend it. It's Kathy Park Hong. Her book is called Minor Feelings: An Asian American Reckoning. And in the context of growing anti-Asian hate, and in a context where we're trying to learn more about Asian American experiences and perspectives, I found this to be a really beautiful, personal, vulnerable book that revealed quite a bit about an experience that, in a way that I have as a South Asian, but coming from a different perspective and really, really instructive for me. So I just love the book.
Say it one more time.
It's Minor Feelings: An Asian American Reckoning by Kathy Park Hong.
Thank you so much. Those are so helpful and just a beautiful range of offerings. So we just really appreciate it. Thanks so much, Simran.
Of course.
Okay. Last but not least, to usher out the 2022, why don't you lay on us a couple of your best dad jokes?
Oh, so okay. The word being a Sikh, it's Sikh, but pronounces. I mean, there are tons of good jokes there.
Okay.
So Sikh is an easy word to play with. I thought that growing up, I had a really unique nickname. In the 90s, everyone called me Turbinator. And then I realized pretty much every Sikh in the country was called Turbinator. So then I had to come up with a new one. And in grad school, when I was at Harvard Divinity, our soccer team, they helped me come up with a new one. And my nickname was The Sickness. So that was a good one as well. And
Wow.
And the last thing I want to say about all of this is you might think that this is just me trying to figure out all these jokes, but I think there's something innate about this because I'm Punjabi. So I think that's where it comes from, my Punjabi background.
Oh, no. Okay. All right. So don't quit your job at Union. Don't quit your job at the Aspen Institute. Let me just but do continue to write. Do continue to to lay on us all this wisdom. We really, really appreciate it. Dr. Simranjeet Singh is Executive Director for Religion and Society Program at the Aspen Institute and a visiting professor of History and Religion at Union Theological Seminary. He is a columnist for the Religion News Service, and his work has appeared in New York Times, Washington Post, and on CNN. Simran, thank you so much for taking time for State of Belief Radio.
Thank you, Paul. Great to spend some time with you.
We've heard some great recommendations of other books from our guests this week. I have a few of my own. I want to highlight some books on Christian nationalism that I think are very important. This has been a major focus for Interfaith Alliance this year. One of them is Taking America Back for God, Christian Nationalism in the United States, an updated edition by Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry. Another one is The Flag and the Cross, White Christian Nationalism and the Threat to American Democracy. This is by Philip Gorsuch and Samuel Perry. And the third is The Seven Deadly Sins of White Christian Nationalism, a Call to Action by the theologian Carter Haywood. I also want to mention Subversive Habits, Black Catholic Nuns in the Long African American Freedom Struggle by Shannon D. Williams. And one more book by my friend and former colleague at Interfaith America, A Time to Build. This is by Ibu Patel, and a beautiful book about how to build things in this country when we talk so much about how things are falling apart. And finally, I want to mention a book by a friend of mine whose name is Grace Schulman. The book is called Again the Dawn, New and Selected Poems from 1976 to 2022. She is an extraordinary woman who has been writing poetry for decades now. I had a chance to hear her read recently, and I'm going to read just the opening to one of her poems called God Speaks. Before the hour I cried, "Let there be light," I tossed out some 300 earlier versions. Revisions help. What clatter in the firmament, though, when mountains fell, stars fizzled out. This work is my best, at least for now. I called, I named each thing, and it was so. I cannot tell you how, from heaven to seas to people, all sprang up, wanting to be. It goes on, and I encourage you to look at Grace Schulman's book, Again the Dawn. And with that, I'm afraid that's all the time we've had for this week's show. We need your help keeping the show on the air, and I hope you'll consider being a partner in this crucial work by making a financial contribution today. Information on how to donate is available at stateofbelief.com. That's stateofbelief.com. And you can also be a part of making sure informative and encouraging voices like the ones we heard today are heard by sharing this program with your friends and family. Let's get more people listening, more people taking part in these conversations, both on and off the air. Never miss an episode by subscribing to the weekly State of Belief podcast on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. And join the conversation. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at State of Belief, and share State of Belief with people in your life. State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week. I can't wait. Until then, I'm Paul Rauschenbusch, and that's State of Belief.
I think it's time we stop. Children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.